Hello, everyone. Ted Lacksonen, the country thinker here. I hope you had a pleasant week and hope you are enjoying the weekend. Anyhow, last week we started July of 2029. We learned that the federal government is officially running out of money, in part because Federal Reserve Chairwoman Andrea Sullivan refuses to turn on the printing presses. We also spent a little bit of time with Herm Stanbaugh, the crusty old farmer who had yet another unpleasant encounter with the government. Today we will wrap up the rest of July of 2029, so let's go ahead and get to the story. Dylan Johansson drove north on Route 315 in his mid-sized Mercedes SUV, heading home to Dublin. The early afternoon traffic was light, as was his mood. He tapped on the leather-gripped steering wheel to the beat of the song on the radio. The meeting at the Ohio State House had gone wonderfully. The two state reps had studied his charts, graphs, and data carefully, and they got it. They really got it. The legal system made Ohio economically uncompetitive in a global marketplace. It made government less efficient, schools worse, and healthcare more expensive. Ohio's legal system was a fiscal disaster that was trashing the state's budget. And as Dylan not so subtly had reminded them, people hate lawyers. Legal reform would be a political home run. Finally, Dylan thought, I've got sponsors for my reform bill. Then something intruded into his happy bubble. He wasn't sure what, but something was amiss. His combat instincts kicked in, and he searched for the intruder with all his senses. Dylan's hands found the problem. Not good, he thought. The steering wheel felt sloppy. The Mercedes was a tight-handling work of German engineering, but it was handling like a beat-up station wagon. Dylan took his foot off the gas. The 90-degree bend that took the highway past Riverside Hospital was approaching fast. Now the steering was doing nothing. He slammed on the brakes as the SUV continued straight at the entry of the turn. The SUV crossed the left lane, and the guy he cut off flew him the bird. The Mercedes was in a tire-squealing skid as it approached the concrete barrier that divided Route 315 down the center. Why the hell was I driving 80? He scolded himself. This is going to hurt. Bad. The left front of the vehicle slammed into the divider with a screeching, sparking crush. The airbags deployed with a whoosh and stopped Dylan's head from bashing the steering wheel. The back left of the SUV snapped around, and the entire length of the driver's side scraped along the concrete, leaving a smear of black paint. The left front tire bounced down into a drainage grate, and the front tire snapped to the right. The worthless steering couldn't stop the Mercedes from turning sharply back onto the highway. The SUV rolled 2.5 times, busting out all the windows, leaving a trail of glass crumbles. Other vehicles skidded and swerved to avoid the Mercedes, which had come to rest on its roof, radiator fluid flowing onto the asphalt like a fluorescent green steaming pool of blood. Inside, Dylan was suspended upside down, strapped in his seat, and unconscious. Benny Johansson left work as soon as she got the call. Her associate Derek would handle the 3:30 hearing before the bankruptcy judge. His look showed nervousness from having a major task dropped into his lap at the last minute, along with a good bit of shock. Derek and Dylan got along well, and the two hung together at the firm's social functions, in no small part because the two were both allergic to social functions. She drove as carefully as possible, but it was difficult to see through the tears. Benny probably should have accepted her secretary's offer to drive her to Riverside. Though she could withstand the withering inquisition of a panel of federal appellate judges without the slightest hint of anxiety, she would burst into tears at the slightest bit of sad news from her family. This was no minor bit of sad news. This was bad. Really bad. The secretary from the hospital had said Dylan had been rushed there, but wouldn't say why. Now Benny knew. A fiery crash on Route 315, the radio reported. Damn it, Benny, why did you turn on the radio? She scolded herself as she wiped away a tear with the back of her wrist. A doctor was studying Dylan's chart when Benny rushed into his room. Her husband was unconscious and plugged into several machines and an IV. I'm Dr. Sanderson, the 40-something physician said, extending her hand. You must be Mrs. Johansson. Benny nodded tearfully and rushed past the doctor to Dylan's side. She dropped to her knees and covered her face with her hands. Sanderson placed a hand on Benny's shoulder. To hell with the hospital rule against contact, she thought. This woman needs the comfort of the human touch. Your husband's a tough cookie, she said. He's got some bangs and bruises, but no broken bones or internal injuries. He's got a minor concussion, but he should recover from that in a week or two. Benny didn't respond. Okay, have the nurses page me if you need me, Sanderson said before she left the room. The following day, Benny was back at Dylan's side. The kids had already visited and were off to Grandma and Grandpa's. Dylan had awoken briefly and groggily several times, but was asleep when there was a knock on the door. A police officer was standing there when she opened the door. Mrs. Benjamina Johansson? She nodded. I'm Aiden Oliver, investigator with Columbus Metro. Probably just a routine follow-up for a highway crash, she thought. What can I do for you? Benny asked. But as she studied him, she became concerned. His expression seemed too severe for a routine follow-up. Given the suspicious nature of the crash, Benny scowled. Suspicious? He nodded. It's not every day an SUV does a barrel roll down 315. I see your point. Anyhow, your husband's blood alcohol was 0, so we scratched the most likely culprit off the list. When I talked to witnesses, they all told the same story. Your husband went straight when he should have turned, like your husband forgot to. Or wasn't able to for some reason. Exactly. So I had our forensic mechanic take a look at it this morning. He rubbed his chin with the back of his hand. Does your husband have any enemies, Miss Johansson? Benny's eyes glimmered with surprise. Excuse me? Does your husband have any enemies? She shook her head. He gets along with pretty much everybody, even people he doesn't like. Why? The officer studied Benny carefully before answering. Miss Johansson, somebody tampered with your husband's steering. What? A wave of adrenaline washed through her body, and she began to shake. Is this guy serious? She asked herself. Someone tried to hurt my Dylan? Calm down, Mrs. Johansson. I want you to think about it really hard. Think of anyone who might have it out for your husband. This investigation ain't going anywhere if I don't have any suspects or a motive. Really, officer, I can't think of anyone. Everyone likes Dylan. He's a really nice guy. I'm sure he is, but it looks like somebody out there doesn't think so. The president of the Defense Contractors Association's hands were in his pockets as he looked through the raindrops on his 7th-floor office window down to the busy Arlington streets below. John Callahan was lost in thought when the obnoxious intercom buzzer on his desk rattled his ears more than the muffled thunder from outside. Miss Eve Anderson is here for her noon appointment, Mr. Callahan. Let her in. The door opened, and his suspicious eyes softened as they did a head-to-toe review of a lean, pretty woman dressed in a thin white blouse and a short black skirt. Although he didn't realize it yet, he could see how Eve Anderson's mature beauty had captured President Maynard's attention. He squinted and tipped his head to the side like the RCA Victor dog. Have I met you before, Miss Anderson? About 10 years ago on the Hill. I was lobbying for some electric utilities. He said as he focused on her eyes. Callahan folded his arms behind his back, and he turned to the window behind his desk. You have made a very interesting offer, Miss Anderson. Forgive me if I find it difficult to believe. As I told you on the phone, John, I can guarantee you the President will not cut one penny from the defense budget. In fact, I can promise that the members of the Defense Contractors Association will see their funding increase. It seems like the economy is stalling and the budget might be in trouble. I can make sure you come out unscathed. Callahan turned and placed his hands on his desk. Okay, Miss Anderson, you have my attention. What have you got and how much will it cost? Anderson pulled out a piece of paper from a manila envelope and set it on the desk. Callahan picked it up and scanned it quickly. He laughed. This is a contract, he exclaimed, shrugging his shoulders. I'm supposed to give you $10 million in exchange for evidence that can destroy the president, which I can use against him to ensure that he doesn't cut a penny from the defense budget, but you won't even tell me what the evidence is. What kind of crap is this? She reached into the manila envelope and placed a second piece of paper on his desk. He picked it up and looked at it briefly. It's a transfer slip from my account back to yours, she said. You send the $10 million, I'll tell you what I know. If you are happy, I keep the $10 million. If you don't want it, you can use this to get it back. Callahan laughed. You're mighty paranoid, Miss Anderson. 15 years in this town will do that to you, John. You've got a point. Have we got a deal? Let's face it, $10 million is a drop in the bucket compared with the billions I'll save your companies. Callahan rubbed his forehead. My initial response is to say no. Anderson shrugged her shoulders. Suit yourself. Someone will take my deal. I'll go on to the pharmaceutical industry next if you don't want what I have, and then to Big Ag, and so on. Callahan squeezed the bridge of his nose and sighed. What the hell? I've done crazier things to keep the dough rolling. He pushed the intercom button. Jenny, come in here, please. The secretary entered and stopped at Anderson's side. Do you have your account information, Miss Anderson? Eve nodded, retrieved another paper from her manila envelope, and handed it to the secretary. Transfer $10 million to Miss Anderson's account, Jenny. She nodded and marched out of the office, closing the door behind her. Callahan turned and sat down in his desk chair. He crossed his right leg over his left knee and reclined with his hands on the back of his head. Okay, Eve, what have you got? I've been having an affair with the president. Callahan gasped and leaned forward with his eyes opened wide. What? The left side of Eve's mouth curled up. You heard me. I've been having an affair with the president. I've been seeing him 2 or 3 times a week for about a year. A wry smile formed on Callahan's mouth as he settled back into his chair. Holy shit. What proof do you have? Anderson pulled a second manila envelope out from under her arm and held it in front of her. The evidence is in here. Pictures? Wouldn't you like to see those? She teased. Better. DNA evidence. DNA evidence? Yup. From samples. I've gotten plenty of them. You've got to be shitting me. Nope, and you just bought them. They're from a certified genetics lab that does things like establish paternity. Eve sat down on the chair in front of Callahan's desk. Flipping the envelope onto the desk, she said, I don't think you'll have much problem getting the president to agree to your very reasonable demands. Callahan laughed and leaned back in his chair. I really can't believe this is happening. Come on, John, she said with a knowing smile. You've been in Washington long enough to know that anything is possible. Ain't that the truth?